Hello, welcome. This is Acceess Astrology. You've tuned into the right place. We are three astrologers who get together every week and look at the sky and see how that's telling us something about what's going on in our lives. And so we take questions too. So you can send us a question or you can ask about your chart. And it's always fun to have a look at those. My name is Mark Waltz. I'm talking to you from New York City. And I'm
this is
joined by Heather.
Rowan Robbins, Heather Rowan Robbins, speaking to you tonight from Ronan, Montana. And Ann Ortley may or may not pop in from Boca Ciega, Florida, which is where she is spending the winter. And so, we'll see. It's an interesting evening. I'm going to add the chart of the moment to the day. Mercury is now turned direct, and we is still in Pisces. Mercury is going to be approaching Neptune. It may not feel like Mercury is direct because Mercury is approaching Neptune, leaving us fuzzy thinking, intuitive, spiritual, but that distortion of what is truth is so evident in the headlines and in our lives. And our minds may just be feeling fuzzy and spinning in circles or just fuzzy at the moment. Mercury is direct, but it will conjunct Neptune early next week. It will enter Aries. And then once it gets past Neptune, I think we're really going to see a speeding up of the process. Both Mercury and Venus had gone into Aries before they retrograded, one in late February, one in March, and then they retrograded back. Now Venus is about to turn direct this weekend, and Mercury is direct and heading back into Aries. So we did a review of the winter's, not doldrums, but the winter's interior time, and that strange unreality of what is truth. I don't think it necessarily improves once Mercury gets into Aries, but it's a different position with it. How do you see that, what Mercury's been doing, Mark?
Well, it really is an interesting trip. I think it gave us the moment to process things, and then all of a sudden it gets charged up. And we're seeing that now, and as you say, when it goes into Aries, and it does that with the conjunction to Neptune, it's going to be fuzzy and fast.
It's an interesting way to put it. And Mars, which has been in Cancer for since early September. Normally it only spends 2 months in a sign, and it went all the way through Cancer where it's not comfortable because it's opposite the sign that it rules, went all the way back, and now is going all the way forward. And we feel that defensive genius that Mars in Cancer is known for, that sharp sting, protective self, and strange ideas of what is home and homeland. Again, like Mercury going from Pisces into Aries, Mars going from Cancer into Leo isn't necessarily objective. It's not necessarily comfortable. Venus is very comfortable in Pisces, but she's conjunct Saturn right now, as we see down here at the bottom of the chart. Before I get to that, there's a lovely trine from that Mars to Venus and Saturn. There's, when we feel good about ourselves or our relationships, our energy, we can hum at that beautiful deep level together. But that's very different than dealing with the world out there. When Mars is in Cancer, we're not getting the soft interior side of this. We're getting the hard with claws edgy side. But Mars leaves not this Friday, but the following Friday, it leaves Cancer and goes into Leo. And when that brings up that extra spicy edge, and we may see more acting out at that point, but it'll be interesting. I wanted to say what, let's talk about that full moon coming up, Mark. And you're good with moments of ingress and full moon. What are you seeing? I did this for the East Coast. What are you seeing in this full moon? Oh, I think we see Anne. We're going to add her to the stage.
Yep.
Hello, Anne. How are you?
Come
I'm
on
good.
in.
I went back a few weeks to find the link.
Ah,
The one I had wasn't working, and I'm like, well, I thought we had a permanent, so I went looking and I found it, which was
oh,
good.
good. I'm
Yeah,
sorry. I put it at the bottom of the email today, but it's easy to lose.
yeah.
How are you, Anne? And where are you
I'm in
zooming in
Florida.
from?
I'm in Florida. I'm okay. I had a pretty bad cold, but my hip's doing better, so that's the good part. I'm
Oh, good.
alive and well, and getting better every day. Yay!
Yay.
So
And we were talking about the full moon coming up.
I
And
know.
here's the full moon in Libra, just as Venus, which rules that full moon, it turns direct, but it turns direct conjunct Saturn, which is a really interesting combination. On the best of days, I see it as kind of emotional stability.
Mhm.
On the other side, that full moon fights between, do we want peace and relationships and to get along, or do we want a revolution, or do we want independent action? How are you seeing this full moon, Anne?
I'm always, this Venus Saturn aspect has been, we had the second one last week, the retrograde one. I'm really ready for it to leave, and Venus to go, bye Saturn. Thanks so much for hanging out. I certainly think of it as the economic stuff we're running through right now,
Yeah.
but I also think of it as, because the full moon is, 22 and a half is the world point. So the sun and the moon are at, at 23 and change. So they're on the world point. So I think it really kind of speaks to the ongoing crazy that we're working with. And then it forms, there's a big old T square. Mars is back in bounds after months of being out of bounds, but he is answering to the moon in Libra, who's answering to Venus. The good news is she's past the affliction to Saturn. But the bad news is she's right next to him, right? So,
Right.
yeah. So the T square, is particularly volatile. And with Chiron on the sun, that to me is if we think of the chart for the United States, or,
Yep. I'm going to put that up right now.
yeah, it's for,
And here's the chart for the United States with the
Yeah.
planets on the outside for the full moon.
right. But the chart itself, that sun and Chiron are in the sixth house of the workers, the people of the country. So it's them being, really affected with all that Pisces stuff in the 12th
Oh, so
house.
much.
It's just a hard chart, but it also takes us back to the new moon in 23 on October 4th of 23, and then the opening square that we had on July 4th last year. So it's a bigger story unfolding, and so that can help a bit. But it's kind of it also marks the end of the eclipse season. Yay. So that's helpful.
Yay.
But it also, because of it, it's just a pretty intense energy. So
Right.
The
And
one to watch. The one to watch is that Mars.
yes,
Because Mars is tied into everything,
yes,
and including the trine, but also the T square.
yeah,
And so
Mhm.
that's really the key. So you want to
Yeah.
really look in your chart, see where that Mars is
Yeah.
hanging out in your chart, and that's the go get 'em energy that you
Yeah.
have. So it's going to tell you what is best to work with.
right,
And the T square, for people that were looking, the Mars is squaring the Sun Moon opposition
Mhm.
almost exactly, within a few degrees. And that adds extra power. And Mars is in the sign ruled by the moon, really cooking it. And the sun is in the sign ruled by Mars. So there is a lot of power to that. And when we look at what's going on in the American chart, we also see Jupiter sidling up to the Mars of our country. And
Mhm.
that Mars of our country, which is in the house of our partnerships and our international partnerships, in the chart of a country that is usually your allies or your open enemies. It's anybody you're dealing with directly as an equal. It isn't
Right.
any of our charts, it's equal relationships. And we have some lovely aspects there when we love somebody and we consider them ours. We're good Cancerian partners and friends and really watch out for the other person's resources. But if not, we can sound even more belligerent than we are with Mars and Gemini in the 7th, with Jupiter coming up to that. Just ridiculously belligerent rhetoric going on at the moment.
Yeah.
At the same time, Jupiter's on our Mars. Mars is on our Mercury. And that, and the square of the full moon is almost exactly square our Mercury in the 8th house.
Yeah.
The 8th house has to do with other people's resources, their monies, their time, and how we deal with that's a perfect thing about the tension of both the money of the people that are investing, because 8th house is often investments, because it's your money going into dealing with other people's resources,
Right.
or their money into yours, or the world tariffs on the international trade with, and the balance or imbalance of that.
Right.
So that's going to be pretty feisty going on there. We don't see that change happening anytime soon. But I like to hear that Mars has gone back in bounds.
Yeah.
And for people who are asking, being in bounds, the bounds are the part of this zodiac where the sun, from the northern pole of the sun or the southern post. And that's sort of, when a planet goes above or below that, where the sun's range is, it's considered out of bounds. It's not following the rules. It's loose. It's a loose cannon.
Right.
And not necessarily better or worse, but a loose cannon. So it's kind of like a wild card.
Right.
So what did you see with Mars out of bounds, Anne?
Well, the whole, it's been out of bounds for a long time. But what happens is every 2 days, 2.5 days, Mars in Cancer changes emotional nature, because it's going to act with the moon, whatever the moon is in, which is why people consider Mars out of bounds, or Mars in Cancer, a difficult placement, because every couple of days it's got a new feeling. It's moony. It's not moody. It's moony, right? So with it out of bounds, when there would be out of bounds moons, which happen, in Gemini and in Sag and Cancer, Capricorn, the moon could really go wild, which was all of this wild stuff we've been going through this last few months, right? And so now Mars is back. So he's back in. And the analogy I use for it, it's like when they're scrambling for a basketball and it goes out, and it stops the play, but then you bring it back in again, or out of bounds, like if you're playing tennis or badminton and the ball goes way up, you have an opportunity to get under it and do some nasty damage when it comes down. But it's out of bounds. It kind of causes everything to not work the way you maybe would like it to. So now that it's back in bounds, it's going to be a little better behaved. Still has to clear its retrograde shadow point, which I believe was 5 Leo. So we're still dealing with, it's been a badly behaved Mars since last fall.
It has.
He's been in Cancer. He's been in Cancer for months. And, it's in my 6th house, so I'm going to be really happy when he gets the heck out of my house.
Oh, I bet. And when we look in any of us, we can look at where Mars is misbehaving. What house is it acting in? Where does it bring inflammation? The challenging side of Mars is inflammation, is defensiveness instead of progressiveness, is, fighting instead of exploring. And we can use Mars on a good day or misuse of sexuality. We can use Mars, how to use Mars in a positive way, to know where you're going, to have a point to head towards, rather than to have that interior fight going on, or thinking that putting someone else down solves your problem, which is what we're seeing a lot of in this crazy time.
Right.
There's also embedded in this full moon chart, there's a yod. The moon is at the apex, and you've got Uranus and Saturn, Venus, sextile to each other and quincunx to the moon. And so that makes things kind of stretch the wrong way for the moon. The moon is not quite sure what to do with that sextile energy of Uranus.
Feels so unsettled. And Venus is in her sign. She's, we're feeling soft. The spring is springing. The crocuses are out. We would like to feel safe. But conjunct Saturn, that doesn't feel safe. How do I test it? I want to go back instead of go forward. I want to curl up in my bed, or I want to go back to the 1950s, or if you're Trump, back to the gold Gilded Age, I would, instead of how do we move forward with it, with that Venus-Saturn conjunction, we can also love our work. So again, there's a positive expression to every aspect, and that can be medicine for its challenging aspect. But Venus has two very different messages here. Saturn, be safe and secure. Sextile Uranus, go explore. It is rather, all these planets are not in grounded signs. The only Earth we have right now is Uranus in Taurus. And
Right.
Uranus, the unsettled planet, is the only planet in Earth signs.
Yeah,
And
it sounds like a lot of broken promises to me.
yeah. And it also, I'm seeing quite literally the tectonic plate shifting. There was a volcano that erupted in the Philippines. There's one in Alaska that's cooking. All around the Pacific Rim, things are shifting and changing a bit.
The ring
So,
of fire. The ring of fire.
Ring of Fire is cooking. Also, the solar flares have been very active. We had Aurora Borealis here the other night. And
Wow.
that, again, is part of just turning up the volume. Always feels like if you were popcorn in a popcorn popper, when the sun gets active, there's a lot more heat blowing up the popcorn popper.
Right. Well, the other thing is the Saturn is in a closing sextile to Uranus, right? So it's distributing out the change. Saturn wants to distribute out the change that Uranus and Taurus has brought. And so we want to kind of think back, what changes are we trying to get out, or maybe release and not carry forward into this next chapter, with that, involving that North Node there too, because that conjunction of Saturn and Neptune only happens, once every, I think it's 45 years, something like that. It's a long cycle when Saturn and Uranus meet up. So he's in Saturn, slower moving. Uranus is slower moving. Saturn's faster. So he's coming in for a landing. He's going to land on Uranus in a couple of years when he gets to Gemini. But there's the distributing of the ideas, the change, and how we think about things. A lot of our thoughts have changed. I had somebody visiting here this week, and we went through. I actually wrote it down in my book, like the different generationals, the Gen Zs, the Gen As, like what years they correspond to, because she knew all that stuff, and what their approach to the world is. And so the Saturn Uranus is the structure of the world, and Uranus is how it's changing. So when we put it against the backdrop of all the changes we're going through here, and and everybody keeps using the word unprecedented. And of course, Saturn is what's the precedent, and Uranus is the un. So every time we hear unprecedented, go, oh, there's that Saturn Uranus changing how we do things. We never did that before. Well, we are now. And it's kind of like, okay,
That's true.
That energy of that sextile. And I hadn't noticed the finger of God there, Mark. Like I'm going to be like, oh my God. Because
how do you describe the finger of God for our audience?
A finger of God is where the planets all fight. So the moon is in cardinal air, wants to move forward, do things. In my case, it's on my Neptune, which probably why I hadn't noticed it till Mark said it. Yeah. And then the Uranus is fixed Earth. Like, you can't make me, I'm not gonna, but it's in a Scorpio way. So it's got a little bit of a tinge or a little bit of a manipulation energy. Yeah. And then the Saturn and the Venus are in the Virgo energy of because it's Aries, where the moon is like the Aries point. Let's go, let's do it, let's go. And then the Venus and Saturn are in Virgo with the node and Mercury. They're all worrying. Wow, I don't know. I'm not sure we can do this. What do we have our mittens? Do we have enough money? Do we have a plan? And then the Scorpio goes, oh, just what are you doing? And so I think of it as three different planets: mutable, fixed, cardinal, fighting air, earth, water, don't get each other. But one of them, in this case, the moon, because she's getting loaded up with the sun, or the Mars, because it's squaring the moon, is going to say, okay, 1, 2, 3, push. And everybody pushes on the dresser in the same direction. And then suddenly the thing moves.
Yeah, I think that's the key.
This
there is that same direction.
But once somebody has a direction, it goes. Yeah. Mhm.
Yeah.
And when you've got a T-square, you've got 3 planets that form like a convex mirror, and it shines on the missing point of the grand square. In
Which
this
is
case, that would be in Capricorn. So getting, it can also mean that where it all acts out is in how the government manipulates us.
Yeah.
But for us, we can also use it in how do we get organized? How do we have a clear goal? Because Capricorn likes a mountain to climb.
Mhm.
How do you direct that out of that kind of tension and into someplace else? What's
Right.
an extra point that they can agree on?
Mhm. Mhm.
We have a one of our listeners right now was asked about that the Mars in Cancer is in their 10th house of work and is really feeling the havoc of that Mars in the 10th house. And the full moon will be right on their Mercury. So it's going to be an interesting lineup for them. And, Jupiter's coming up to their moon, which is lovely. There's some lovely, aspects happening. But what advice would you give them? And Neptune is sitting right on their Vesta, so it's like not time to sacrifice yourself for anybody. But what would you give them to work with this? Anne?
I would say
In the
take
world box.
vacation.
Is what?
Take a vacation. The power, there's been a lot of power struggles going on above you for a while, and
Mhm.
this is when they decide what they're going to do. Whether the person above you gets the boot or 2 levels up comes after you.
That's
So
interesting.
you've been a little bit picked on, it looks like, from the perspective of the chart in terms of responsibilities. And
Mhm.
of course, the T square feeds into her Saturn at the bottom,
Mhm.
right? So this is going to be the culmination of what you've been dealing with since last fall on this full moon. So
Mhm.
I'm
Mhm.
always like, take a vacation, because you'll get the memo that they're firing you, or that your boss finally quit or whatever.
And this is a case where I think it's been trouble finding work or getting work
Oh, trouble
moving.
finding work. Okay.
And so this is like she's been on vacation, now she wants work.
Now
But
she
I think
wants
a
work. Okay.
vacation from unemployment is working.
Totally, totally.
Yeah.
Well, that may be why she's had trouble with Mars fighting with the 10th house.
Mhm.
She goes
Mhm.
into a work situation, and when she's interviewing, she's putting out some, not that you're doing it on purpose, but you're putting out some energy that the interviewer is going to experience as, well, I don't know that you really want this job, right?
Right.
Because
And
the Mars Saturn opposition has been active. I mean, it's just releasing now. It's been active since last fall, you know.
And Jupiter is going to be coming up to her moon and trining her Venus in the months ahead, which I think will really help her kind of express and get, be visible to people.
Mhm.
And the lineup, and Jupiter is on that moon, which rules her 10th house.
Right.
So I'm seeing some really good stuff for this, but it may take her kind of to really kick in that Capricorn to see the work systems that Saturn's right down here at the bottom of the chart. When she gets a chance to have a structure, this
Mhm.
chart cooks. But when it doesn't have a chance to build her, like have Capricorn underneath her own office, her own
Mhm.
place to do this, then it's hard to get the momentum going.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And she's also been having Uranus opposite her Pluto, so that's disruptive too. Lot of disruption. And I don't
Mhm.
know, is she doing work she actually wants to do? She's going to have a Jupiter return beginning of June, so that's
Mhm.
also auspicious for finding money because Jupiter rules the money house and 6th house work, Pisces, creative work that she likes. So I would say June 7th, there's a real opportunity when you have that Jupiter return for stuff coming in.
And
But
when you get a chance, look for comfort.
yeah,
Talk
The,
about that,
the,
Mark.
the Venus and the Moon both, the way that they're lining up, are going to open you to giving comfort to others and also receiving it.
Mm.
And it doesn't have to be a big deal. It's just, let it be a 5 minute comfort break, just where you sort of tune out of the situation you're in and take a break. You can do your vacations 5 minutes at a time.
Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah. And the Mercury, her natal Mercury squares are Saturn, right? So
Hmm.
that's involved in this full moon too. So it may be hearing from somebody external to her,
Yeah.
may hear from somebody some information on how to do the work environment, handle the work environment changes.
So all of us can look at where we have that Mars, at what house we have Mars,
Mhm.
where that 23 degrees is from Cancer, from Aries to Libra hits in our charts, to when we can see where we are activated, where's the light coming from, where's the tension, and where can we put the work in? Where do we have that 23 degrees, 24 degrees of Capricorn? Where can we put the work in to build a structure to take this tension and direct it forward?
Totally.
Yep. It was very, very talented chart. So back to this. Do we have anything else we'd like to mention for people on the full moon? And as Venus turns direct, maybe some stuck creative or personal projects may finally unstick.
Yeah. Yeah, I think they do unstick with Venus on Saturn in the node. They kind of start to move forward.
Mm-hmm.
She's been a little, when she's in Pisces, she's very dreamy, but she doesn't necessarily get to the stuff that needs to be gotten to. And now that Mars is better behaved because he's in bounds, he's going to be helping because he is activating by that. He's forming that grand trine. I have been including Vesta, although now Mars and Venus are kind of moving away from it. So it's not so much a grand trine in water anymore. They've moved off, but it definitely is, okay, how do I nurture and take care of myself in a way that feels helpful, right?
I noticed that as Neptune went into Aries, we're talking about the asteroids, so we're going to maybe run them, Tad, trining Juno in Sagittarius, that, a lot of conversation about the legal changes they're trying to make about voting, that you have to vote with your birth name, really disempowers all the married women.
Yep.
Because their names have changed, and that and so has Vance changed his name 3 times. He would have to vote under his birth name. So, but that Juno really cooks and says, where do you have to choose between the work that you love and a partnership that feels right? And so I think you're seeing a lot of ire coming up in people who were surprised. It's good.
That's interesting. I hadn't thought of it that way, but yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
That whole voting thing. I mean, we make it hard, or people make it hard. It should be like, hey, you're 18, you're registered to vote. But we don't want you voting, so we're going to make it hard, because if you vote, you might actually not agree with us. So I remember I was teaching at a trade school, computers, and they got me teaching marketing. And it was an election year, and I got the kids we were talking about elections, and New York Times came out with a graph of income versus voting rates, and I was teaching, and the kid, teaching them how to read graphs. So one of them goes, so poor people don't vote? I'm like, right. And she goes, well, what? I said, well, what do you think that means? If you don't vote, are you heard? And they're like, no. It was one of those classes where I really feel like I made a difference because we did that. We did more.
Good job.
But it was those kids came up with, as their marketing project, voter registration. And so they brought registration forms in and registered all these people to vote of the students. And they use that graph saying poor people don't vote. We need to vote. Right. But it was, we don't want you voting. Because you might express yourself. So I think that's interesting because they are really jerking around.
And far more people did not vote last time than voted for either candidate.
97 million people that were eligible to vote did not vote. 63 million that were registered to vote did not vote. So those 97 million that didn't vote, go register. Because this is why voting is important.
And on that note, and that moon in Libra, which is the full moon of equality, fairness, justice, Mark, would you like to close for us with a brief meditation?
Yeah, let's play a little with this T-square. Wherever you're standing or sitting, put your arms out to the side. Make a gentle fist. Doesn't have to be tight. So one of those fists is the moon, the other is the sun. That's where they are in the sky. And then let your head be where the Mars is, or looking up. And think of that T-square and the kind of tension that exists within a T-square, and then release that tension into Capricorn, which is opposite to the Mars. And if you can think in your chart where that is, you may have to tip a little, or raise one arm, the other down, wherever you find that axis of the sun-moon. And then you have the Mars squaring it in a place for energy in Capricorn.
Wonderful.
Okay.
Well, thank you all. We will see you all next week. This is Heather Rowan Robbins saying goodbye from Ronan, Montana. And
Mark Waltz saying goodbye from New York City.
And Ann Ortley is saying goodbye from Florida. Focus
Okay.
Bay.
And we're all available for individual readings if you want to see how to take that into your chart. Take care, and we'll see you next week.
Okay,
Bye.
thanks for listening.